if that's okay. So can I welcome all members and officers to the meeting of the Audit Committee, which, due to government advice to practice social distancing, this meeting will be held virtually. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed following the meeting. Everyone participating in the meeting will be accessing this meeting from remote locations. Please could everybody ensure that mobile phones are switched off or onto silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda. I will ask officers to present a summary of the key points. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their cameras on at that point. But I would ask that, with the exception of myself as chairperson, at all other times you keep your cameras and microphones switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference, and to ensure the connection remains as stable as possible. If any members and officers wish to raise a point or question, they should use the instant messaging IM icon in the bottom left of the Skype window and simply type speak, and I will come to you in the order I receive requests. Please don't use your microphone until I invite you to do so. And the little icon, if anybody isn't sure about, it just looks like a speech bubble in the left-hand corner. In the event that the committee requires to vote on any item of business before it at the meeting, I will announce that the members of the committee have 20 seconds to vote by typing for, against, abstain, noted in the instant messaging icon. I will then ask Democratic Services to announce the decision made by the committee. Officers from Democratic Services will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout the meeting, and where necessary will mute those not being used. Before we formally commence, I will ask the officer from Democratic Services to announce the names of the councillors in attendance at this meeting. I would also ask the officers to introduce themselves as and when I invite them to speak during the course of the meeting. They too should ensure microphones and cameras are switched off when not in use. Before I ask Mark to do that, though, you were all sent a presentation about the statement of accounts last week. Can I suggest that you open that attachment, because it may help us when we get to that point on the agenda, okay? But Mark, if I can ask you now to announce the members in attendance, please. Or Andrew. Sorry, Mark or Andrew.
Andrew.
I can do that, Chair. Members in attendance this afternoon are Councillor Lynn Walters as Chair, Councillor Alex Williams, Councillor Altaf Hussain, Councillor Amanda Williams, Councillor Bridie Sedgbeer, Councillor Cheryl Green, Councillor Paul Davis, Councillor Richard Granville, Councillor Tom Beadle and Mrs Jo Williams. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. We'll now go through the agenda. So, item number 1, apologies for absence.
Yes, thank you, Chair. For the benefit of the recording, my name is Andrew Rees. I'm Democratic Services Manager. The apologies we have today are from Councillor Mike Kern and from Councillor Janice Lewis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. So, item number 2, declarations of interest. If any member or officer has an interest to declare in any matter on the agenda, please can you type speak into the meeting chat, and I will come to you in turn to announce your declaration of interest. Okay, item number 3, approval of minutes of the meeting of the 30th of January 2020. Could I have a mover? Well, first of all, is everybody, or can I have a mover and a seconder for the minutes, please?
Move. Second.
Right. Can I ask, first of all, Joe, you're typing a message. Have you got some comments about the...
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you, Joe.
Good, good. Yes, I just have a point that is probably relevant to the minutes. In the last meeting, which was January 30th, I had to leave early, and I missed the internal audit report. So I had some questions on that, and I sent that to Mark Thomas, who then answered my questions. I just want to mention that I guess that should be recorded somewhere, and I'm open to your suggestions, to the officer's suggestions as to where that is. But there were three questions, I think, and very full answers were given, and I think it might, that fact should be recorded somewhere for that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Andrew, are you able to insert that? I think you were copied in. I do remember the questions from Mrs. Williams. Is that possible to be inserted?
Yes, we can incorporate those questions from Mrs. Williams into the minutes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And the responses that Mark Thomas gave. Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Provided by Mark. Yeah.
Thank you. Cheryl, you've asked to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In the minutes, actually, I'm not listed as being present, but if you look, I raised the fact that I had sent my apologies for the previous meeting, because it says that subject to the addition of apologies from Councillor Cheryl Green, I was in the meeting and I raised that point.
Yeah.
But I think possibly I didn't sign the paper. Very possible.
Okay, all right then. Thank you, Cheryl. We'll get you included on the minutes. So thank you for that. Could the two councillors who said move and seconded for the minutes just type their names, because I didn't quite recognise the voices. Could they just type in the message box, please? Altaf, was that a mover or seconder?
Move. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. And who seconded, please? Thanks, Tom. Thank you very much. So, item number 4, the Audit Committee Action Record. I'll now ask the Democratic Services Manager to present this report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide the committee with the updated Audit Committee Action Record. The Action Record is presented to each meeting of the committee for approval, and I will take the committee through to the recommendations in the report, which is to note the Action Record. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So there are a couple of actions that we're waiting for. So Audit Wales, I'm just trying to find it. Sorry. No, it's okay. That's been dealt with. Sorry, I do apologise. So can I ask if everybody's happy to note that report, please? If you can just put noted in the message box, unless anybody's got any questions. Oh, sorry, Sarah Jane, you wanted to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. For the record, I'm Sarah Jane Byrne from Audit Wales. There is an action for Audit Wales there relating to scrutiny. I just wanted to kind of let you know that we had a really constructive conversation with the Chief Executive and Jill last week around scrutiny. And this week, I think the Overview and Scrutiny Committee agreed to set up a scrutiny panel relating to the recovery planning work. And as part of that, kind of aligned to the Fit for the Future report that we produced a couple of years ago, we're hoping to kind of do some critical friend type support work with that panel. And I just wanted to let you know, really, because through that, my colleague, Tim Buckle, will be kind of going through that Fit for the Future toolkit and things like that. So I just wanted to let the committee know. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah Jane. Can I just clarify then? So this is really to cover off the more innovative practices by the council. Is that correct? Or the more innovative practices that the council could consider using? Is that to close that action down? Lovely.
Yes. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So we can now have that closed. Lovely. Thank you very much. So that report has been noted. So moving on then to item number 7, which is the external audit annual audit plan. So I'll ask Audit Wales to present their report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me a second while I just pull up the right paper and the agenda papers. So this is an update in terms of our work programme. It is aligned, I suppose, later on we've got the...
Oh, sorry, I do apologise. I've missed an agenda item, Sarah Jane. I've missed item number 5. Yeah. I'm so sorry. So it's the Wales Audit Office follow-up review of corporate arrangements for the safeguarding of children. So I'll now ask Sue Cooper, the Corporate Director of Social Services and Wellbeing, to present her report. So apologies.
Thank you very much, Chair. For the purposes of the recording, this is Susan Cooper, Corporate Director of Social Services and Wellbeing. Thank you very much for the invitation today. The report I'm presenting is the Wales Audit Office follow-up review of corporate arrangements for the safeguarding of children. And the purpose of the report is to inform you as a committee of the outcome of the Wales Audit Office review, which was done in 2019, and also the proposals for improvement made, and to update the committee today on the actions taken in response to the proposals for improvement. I'm going to summarise very quickly because I'm aware that you have a long agenda. So if I just take you to number 4. So I'll take the committee to paragraph 4.1, which says that the report issued in October 2019 found that overall the Council has met or partially met the recommendations and proposals for improvement, and have identified further proposals for improvement to strengthen the aspects of the Council's corporate safeguarding arrangements. And there were 9 proposals, and these have been set out in paragraph 4.2. We've had a small corporate group which have brought together to ensure that the proposals were worked on, worked through and actioned as appropriate. So at paragraph 4.4, I've set out what the progress is. I don't intend to go through all of those, but I would just like to draw committee's attention to proposal 5, 7 and 9, because these are ones that are still being progressed whilst the others have been completed. So if we go down to proposal number 5, and this was to do with the preparing of tenders. So whilst preparing tenders, procurement will consider use of safeguarding provisions in tenders and contracts, and we will look to liaise with our contract lawyers for contract conditions. So this action is still being progressed. The contracts that we have in social care, and I think because safeguarding is so much part of what we do in social care, they're part of any contract re-tendering. Across the council, as tenders are come up for renewal, they will be actually, the safeguarding elements will be incorporated them as they're being looked at. But also just to say that a procurement report went to Cabinet in October last year, and the report referenced the code of practice of ethical employment in the supply chain. And as part of that code, there are a range of commitments that relate to safeguarding. So, for example, the protection of modern slavery. So there are some provisions in there already. We will be looking to strengthen that as and when the tenders come up for renewal. And then if I take committee down to proposal number 7, which was around the audit of volunteering activity. So the audit's been completed, but the outcomes have not yet been reported into CMB, and that's because what we've hit in the last few months, really, it was due to come, and of course we've been hit by COVID considerably. So there is more to do. There are some capacity issues, I think, in being able to do everything that's needed in this particular area. HR are leading on this, and of course it's also coincided with a review of the HR structure, changes in staff, and then more recently the last few months. So we will be monitoring this, and progress will be made going forward. The last one, if I take you to proposal number 9, and this was, we have made progress in this. This is about the corporate safeguarding group. So we did hold a workshop and we reviewed the functionality of the local group, and we've made recommendations. There was a workshop was held in January, and a small group has come together to take that forward. So the task and finish group coming together has been delayed, but a date is now in the diary to progress that. So those are the 3 that are still in progress, and the others have been completed. So with that, I'll just take committee to the recommendation at 9.1 that you receive the report and note the actions and progress made against the proposals for improvement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Can I ask if anybody has any questions of Sue, and whether everybody's happy to note the report? If you could put that in the comments box, please. I think Mrs. Williams, you were typing a message. It hasn't come through. I don't know if you're still you're still typing. Yeah.
I'm just looking for myself on the list, Chair. The list.
I couldn't see it on the list.
No. What I mean is, I don't seem to be on the list to, to give you a message, which is why I'm using the speak.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I did ask you because I could see it was saying you were typing, but for some reason it's not coming up in my conversation box. So if you're noting, or if you've got a question, please go ahead.
I'm noting.
Oh, lovely. Okay, thank you very much. So
thank you.
That report then is noted. So thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to stay for the rest of it because it's a very exciting meeting, but I'd quite understand if you want to dial off now.
I thank you for the offer. I will dial off. It's been a long day on Skype, and I can turn my attention to something else. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Sue. Take care. Bye. So we'll now move on to item number 6, second time lucky, Sarah Jane. So the Audit Wales Audit Committee update, if you're happy to present your report now, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, as Chair said, I'm Sarah Jane Byrne. I'm from Audit Wales. You'll see in front of you an update on our work programme. My colleague John Llewellyn is also here. John, I don't know if there's anything particularly you want to say in terms of the financial audit update, and then I'll pick up on the performance audit aspects.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Apologies first. I can't get my webcam to work at the moment. I don't know, my thing is completely greyed out. So I'm John Llewellyn from Audit Wales. We received the draft account on the 30th of June 2020. And so far we've made good progress to date, and we're on track to be able to present the ISA 260 to the September Audit Committee. I just want to say that remote working hasn't caused us major problems, and I think that's down to the fact that finance and IT have been very helpful in setting up remote access, so we can access the shared server and also the ledger, which has made the process extremely more efficient than it would have been had we not had that. No major issues with the accounts and the audit so far, but yeah, we report back on September.
Thank you, John.
Okay, I'll just pick up now on the kind of performance audit aspects. So in terms of our 1920 programme of work, it sets out a couple of the pieces of work that we have already done. So one of those relates to our Wellbeing of Future Generations examination, and when we provided the report back in February, the financial sustainability report is on the agenda in a little bit, so we'll come to that shortly. The third piece of work there is around the Health and Social Care Partnership. This project has been put on hold at the moment due to the pandemic, but we will sort of discuss the feasibility of that piece of work again with officers, appreciating they're extremely busy at the moment. The annual improvement report, which you'll recall is a report that summarises all our work throughout the year. We're going to be looking at that, doing that later on in the autumn. In terms of our programme of work then for this year, for 2021, we have issued the certificate relating to the forward plan, so that's the improvement plan audit. The performance audit we will do later on in October, and again the annual improvement report next year. The assurance and risk assessment work, which we've been doing for the last couple of years now, is underway. And last year we did meet with officers to discuss the outcome of that, and that informs our programme of work for the next year. The key piece of work that we're doing now this year, and this is a change slightly to the what is in the current audit plan, is we are doing a piece of work around recovery planning, and we are doing this work at all 22 councils. It is intended to be an assurance piece of work, but also a kind of critical friend type piece of work as well. The work won't be the same at each council. It really does depend in terms of where each council is and the particular areas that we choose to focus on. But as I mentioned, I had a really good conversation with the Chief Executive and the Interim Director of Finance last week around that. So we have talked about, as I said, doing some work potentially around the scrutiny panel in the first instance. And then the other piece of work, I'm sure you won't be surprised to see this, is another piece of work around financial sustainability. We are currently doing the phase 1 piece of work around that, very much with a COVID focused, thinking about the impact that has had on council's financial position. We've been working again with the treasurers to sort of scope that piece of work, and we will be producing a national summary report in August, and then we'll be doing some more local work on the back of that later on in the autumn. The other piece of work, which is more of a bespoke piece of work to Bridgend, as a result of the assurance and risk assessment process last year, we agreed that we would do something relating to digital, and we're currently discussing that and hoping to have a meeting with officers to scope that piece of work. And then lastly on there, it mentions the COVID learning project that we've been doing, trying to capture some of the kind of more innovative practice. And you might have seen that we've been doing some blogs, and if you're on our Twitter feed, you might have seen some things around there, and I'd encourage you to have a look at that. And I've just provided a link really there to the position statement that the Auditor General published a few weeks ago, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah Jane. So can I ask if anybody has any questions, if they can type into the question box, and also if people are happy to note the plan. Thank you. Okay, I can't see anything else coming through, so we'll take it that that is noted and there are no further questions. Thank you very much, Sarah Jane. So now moving on to, oh, Joe, did you have anything to say?
Thank you, Chair. No comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Williams. So item number 7, the External Audit Action Plan for 2020. Now ask Audit Wales to present this, please.
Thank you, Chair. John Llewellyn, Audit Wales. First of all, I'm going to take you through the financial audit aspect of the plan. So our plan sets out what we are going to do, when we're going to do it, and how much it's going to cost. First, I'd like to draw your attention to a slight change in the plan this year. On page 12, the timetable, which usually includes plan dates of when we will complete various elements of the audit by, doesn't include those this year due to the uncertainties resulting from the impact of COVID-19. However, we are in contact with financial audit staff, finance staff, to agree dates, and as already mentioned, we're making good progress. Just to also draw your attention to the Appendix B, the additional letter, which sets out in more detail the impact of COVID-19 and the responses we've taken in respect of our work. I also want to draw your attention to page 6, which sets out the risks of the audit. Again, they are broadly similar to what's been included in previous years, with an added risk this year for COVID-19 and the impact on various areas such as revaluations, etc., which may have a material impact on the accounts. Also, page 9 sets out details about grants work, and page 10, the fee for the year. Again, I'd like to draw your attention to there has been a reduction in the grants fee this year, and that's the reduction in the number of grants we will be auditing this year, because Welsh Government grants no longer require auditing for 1920. Finally, just like to confirm that section 12 confirms that the audit team are all independent of the council and officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Sorry, you just broke up right at the very end. Am I right in thinking that you were saying that the audit is independent of the council and officers?
Of the council and officers, yes.
Thank you. Sorry, you just broke up slightly. I just wanted to check that. No, it's not your fault. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for John? Jill, you've said that you couldn't hear John that well. Was it just the end bit, or was it anything else that you had concerns about, Jill?
No, I just couldn't pick it up very well. I didn't know whether it was just me, maybe. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Is everybody else happy, or does anybody want John to go through the report again? Otherwise, if you're happy, if you can put noted. If you've got any questions or would like John to go through the report again, please say that. And Mrs. Williams, I know that your message box doesn't work. Are you happy?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Right. Okay. So the report is noted, and we're now moving on to item number 8. The Wales Audit Office Financial Sustainability Assessment. So I'll now ask Audit Wales to present their report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, this was a piece of work that we did. We did it across all 22 councils. As the report states, I'm sure you won't be surprised that the financial position in local government was a concern to us, and also on the back of some of the financial positions of some of the English authorities. So we thought it was right and proper to do this piece of work, essentially for us to understand if there are any councils that we need to be really quite concerned about in terms of their financial position. I think hopefully it comes across fairly clearly in this report that overall we don't have any significant concerns about the financial position of Bridgend. The conclusion was that it has a strong financial position. We've touched on some areas for improvement potentially around some of the medium-term financial strategy, but from a resilience point of view, as I said, we don't have any major concerns. I wasn't proposing to go through the report in any detail, because hopefully it is fairly clear, just to offer the opportunity really for members to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah Jane. Does anybody have any questions? Jill, I can see you typing a message. Do you want to come in first? Yep, Jill.
I'm happy to defer to questions if people have got questions, but I suppose just wanted to set it in a bit of context. And we've had the discussions with Audit Wales and continue to have ongoing discussions both individually and I think Sarah Jane at the 151s across Wales, and I know you do with the WLGA and the Welsh Government, because it sounds a bit trite, but that was then and now is now sort of thing, and a whole pile of stuff has happened since we received that report, and obviously it's published and therefore it should come to the Audit Committee. But I just wanted to set it in the context of the time, because since March, obviously we've gone into quite a dramatic situation where if you'd asked me then were we financially sustainable, I'd have said pretty confident that with good control and good budgetary control and savings profiles we'd be okay. Sat where I am now, probably, I think if I was to say I don't know whether we are financially sustainable, I don't think I'd be exaggerating, because so much has changed, and I know Deb can come in with some of the detail on this. And I have to say that Welsh Government have been very good in terms of setting out a whole package of support measures in terms of hardship, social care, homelessness, free school meals, loss of income, etc., and also trying to help business. As we know, but we've got 30 million out of the door in terms of business grants that I know as councillors you will all be aware of. And we are putting in claims each month to the Welsh Government, and some of which are being paid, some of which aren't, depending on their appropriateness, obviously. So for instance, ICT, we're getting 50% of what we've had to incur, and that's because there's more of a medium-term benefit from what we've invested in, the kit and all the rest. So, you know, on the face of it, that's reasonable. On the other side of the coin, we have to find that 50% now rather than over the medium term. And our Q1 report that some of you will have seen with the publishing of the Cabinet papers sets out the overspends that we've got, 3 million and counting, in terms of the projected overspend, and that doesn't include at the moment the council tax defaults or the arrears that we're likely to incur. A lot of people deferred their payments from June to March, and also council tax reduction, which goes hand in hand and is a cash limited budget. Now, the Welsh Government haven't said that they won't be supporting those, but we still have uncertainty. So I don't want to paint too bleak a picture, and I don't want to give the impression that the finance team aren't on top of it, but it is a very uncertain time, and so I wouldn't want it's an opportunity really for members who haven't been involved in Cabinet to understand the situation, I think, a little bit better. So I just wanted to say that. Deb, do you want to add to that in any way?
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Chair. For the record, Deborah Exton, Deputy Head of Finance. Yes, just to reiterate really what Jill has said, we've got a couple of reports going to Cabinet next week, as she said, on the revenue monitoring position for this financial year. And whilst it's always quite difficult at this point in time to actually estimate what the kind of outturn position is likely to be, this is an unprecedented situation. We've got a number of funding streams from Welsh Government, and you know, we have submitted monthly claims in terms of additional expenditure that we're incurring. We don't know until we've submitted the claim and then a couple of weeks later whether or not that funding is going to come back to us, and obviously new funds are announced as we go along as well. We're also looking at income that we're losing, for example, from our car parks and from, you know, other services which generate income. We don't know whether we'll get additional funding for that. As Jill mentioned, we've got council tax collection, obviously the impact on the economy and on people and their own personal economic positions is having an impact. So we've got more people requiring council tax support, more people requiring housing benefit support. It's just a number of different pieces all in the jigsaw, really, that it's very difficult to predict where we will end up, and it's how long this will go on for, how long it will take to recover. So like we said at the when the report was written, we were in quite a reasonable position, we thought, but it's very difficult at the moment to see where we will end up in this financial year, and also how long it will go on and what impact it will have in future financial years. So there's quite a lot of unknown, which normally we wouldn't have in any particular year, that we just, as we obviously updating our information as we go along and just waiting to see what happens next, really. Thank you.
Chair, do you want me to pick up on Councillor Williams's question?
Well, I know that, Sarah Jane has just asked if she can come back, please, on the comments that both you and Deb have said. So if I can ask Sarah Jane first, and then if we can go back to Amanda after that, Jill, if that's okay, please. Sarah Jane?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, it was just to clarify. I mean, Jill is exactly right. Obviously, this piece of work was done prior to the pandemic. And hence the reason why we are going to be doing a second piece of, well, it'll be our third financial sustainability piece of work, very much focused on looking at the impact of COVID, and there will be that report I mentioned that will look at the position across all of local government. So that will definitely, I think, be totally akin, picking up some of the issues that both Jill and Deb have raised. I'm sure members of the Audit Committee will be interested in that report when it comes out in a month or so. Thank you, Chair.
Definitely, thank you. And Jill, if you are, thank you very much, Sarah Jane. And Jill, if you are happy to go back to Amanda now, please.
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry, Chair. For the record, I should have said before I spoke, for the record, Chief Officer, Finance, Performance and Change, Jill Lewis. The turnaround on payments for Welsh Government is not as simple as it might appear, and I think both Deb and I have wrestled with, and Nigel in particular, with our cash flow. We are managing the cash, and the Treasury Management Q1 report is actually a report for noting on Cabinet. So there's more detail in that about how we're managing our cash flow, but wherever possible the Welsh Government are trying to get money to us as quickly as possible, but on some things there is a time delay. So for instance, on costs, we're submitting monthly claims pretty much about 5 to 10 days after the end of the month, and they're coming back in fairly promptly, the payments, unless they're in pending or unless they've been disallowed. In terms of our income loss, at the moment, we've got an estimated claim that's in there for the first quarter, and as yet, we won't have received any money for some of our income loss, or even an indication on what will be paid and what won't be paid. So we've had pretty prompt payments, and indeed some in advance for the business rates. So we manage that fairly well, but when we come to the social care workers who are going to receive £500, we know that we won't get the money until August. Well, as it happens, because of the difficulties with the tax implications, we should be okay by now, but had we had to pay it in June, we would have had another time lag. So we can rely on short-term borrowing for cash flow if we need to. But nevertheless, it's a really good point to raise, Councillor Williams, that cash flow remains an issue. We don't want to run out of cash and not be able to pay the staff.
Yeah.
So we're being very prudent with it.
Thank you, Jill. Before I ask if anybody's before we move to any other questions or noting the report, can I make a comment, please, to Sarah Jane? And that is, I know that we're in the position where we are now, and this report was done before COVID, but I must confess that I was surprised that there were no recommendations, and I didn't find the report, apart from the opening statement that we appeared to be in a good position, terribly helpful. It didn't really tell us anything. It didn't categorically say at the end, there was no summary to say that at the end to say that everything was okay, no recommendations, and there were comments in there which were open to interpretation. So one of the things, saving targets have reduced by 5 million and £5 million lower than 15-16. Again, there was no, were you expecting the savings targets to be at the same level? If not, it seemed to be a superfluous comment. The council has a high level of usable reserves. Is that positive, negative, or too much? You know, so it was, I found the report not terribly helpful in that way because of various comments. So I don't know whether that was the same across the board or across for all councils, and whether some councils did have very clear recommendations. So I'd be interested to know if that is the case, Sarah Jane.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I can clarify that. We made a decision not to include recommendations at this stage in most of the reports. Our intention was, prior to COVID, to produce some kind of national report in which we were going to include some recommendations, because there are actually some recommendations that we felt were pertinent to most of councils. However, due to the COVID pandemic, we took a decision not to publish a national report, and we feel that was the right decision to make, and hence the reason why we're now doing this second piece of work, and there will be a national report in August. So hopefully that clarifies that. So yes, generally across the piece, unless there were really significant recommendations, I understand we didn't make many in most reports. In terms of the position you mentioned, sorry, about the, I think you asked about the savings targets, Chair. So whether we were making a judgment around that. We didn't go into huge amounts of detail around this. It was just to say, try to give a position statement in terms of the level of savings that had been achieved. So it wasn't, I mean, at the end, you know, savings targets are generally determined on an annual basis, depending on the level of savings that need to be achieved and the types of savings that need to be achieved. And it obviously all needs to be considered in the whole, looking at the financial situation across the piece, because obviously savings is just one aspect of that. You also asked about the levels of reserves. So this was something that has been included in most reports, and it will also be one of the things that we'll be looking at, I understand, as part of that August national report. We didn't, in terms of, you know, from a resilience point of view, having, you know, good levels of reserves gives that resilience, and there are some councils who have lower levels of reserves that are more concerning. So this was looking at kind of usable reserves. So again, this needs to be considered in the round. So we, from a financial resilience point of view, you do have that resilience there because you have built up a number of reserves over the course of a number of years. So in that respect, from a financial resilience position, that is quite positive. I hope that answers your questions, Chair.
It does. May I make a plea then? Because I now fully understand why there were no recommendations. But for published reports, it would have been helpful to have had a comment to say that there are no recommendations in this report because they will be covered by a national report when we've done all counts, when we've completed a review of all councils. That way, the reader isn't left hanging, thinking, well, is this good, negative, of concern, you know, very positive? That would have been, to me, that would have been helpful and would have just closed the loop. So
Yes.
Now I know
that on board, sorry.
Thank you very much. Now I know Mrs. Williams was trying to type something. So Mrs. Williams, can I ask you to come in, and then I'll ask Jill to come in.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, it is a bit confusing here, but as long as I type something, it would seem that you can see it and you know that I want to come in, so that's fine.
Yeah.
I've read the report. In terms of the recommendations, I see what you're saying. There's not explicit recommendations, but I did read the findings, if you like, in the way that the statement which says what we found, or we found that, I read some of those as being, implicit recommendations in effect. So I just wanted to comment on that and to ask really, on page 6 of the report, there are a number of comments there about the findings regarding the medium-term financial strategy, which are kind of pointing to, I guess, maybe improvements or changes. And I just wanted to say that those I would regard as recommendations. And I suppose I would like to ask Sarah Jane and Jill to comment on those points, please.
Jill, are you happy? And if you could also, I know you wanted to come back, if you're happy to respond, please.
Sorry, Mrs. Williams, I missed a little bit of that. Could you just, would you mind just saying what the question was?
Yes, no problem. The question is, there are, I think, 3, if not 4 points about the medium-term financial strategy in the report. Tell me if you're not following me. On page 6. For example, it says, the medium-term financial statement does not evaluate past financial performance. It says it does not provide detailed activity. And so, I just wanted to know, really, are you interpreting that as some things to take on board for the future, or indeed for the moment, as regards the strategy?
Okay. So this is about linking finance with performance, and I think all public sector bodies find it really, really difficult sometimes to produce value for money unit costs, and it's something we're striving really hard to do. We've tried to link the corporate plan far more with the medium-term financial strategy, and to get activity levels associated with cost. But when we come to look at benchmarking to try and see whether we think we're delivering value for money, efficiency, effectiveness, it's very difficult because people deliver in so many different ways. So I think I would say that we're seeing that as a sort of recommendation that we should do more to try and evaluate that and to use analytics more. And in fact, I've had the conversation with Audit Wales about how they can help us to do that. So in terms of benchmarking and how we link better our objectives with the cost of delivering those. So I would say it's work in progress. I don't think we're there yet. Does that help?
Yes, it does help me to some extent. I'd be interested in Sarah Jane's response to that. As is that what you're looking for, if you like, or would like to see happening as we go forward?
Yes, if I could come in to respond to that then. Yes, there were some, areas within the report which you're right, Ms. Williams' comment on the robustness of the MTFS. We've had, conversations with officers about this, and we did also do a savings planning report last year. So, it would be good, and it's positive to hear that, Jill is taking some of those things on board. Things like, and again, some of these issues I think would have been pulled out perhaps in that national report that I mentioned around MTFSs or medium-term financial plans, setting out how, for example, they might be kind of meeting the budget gap, how that budget gap is identified, the information that's used to identify that. So it's about tightening some of that up, and we, as Jill says, we have had conversations around that. So whilst they weren't explicit kind of recommendations, obviously it's good to see that the council are considering how they can strengthen their MTFS, sorry.
Okay. Are you happy? Is that okay, Mrs. Williams?
That's great, Chair. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Jill, you wanted to come back in again.
Yes, sorry, it was the point that I was originally going to make, and it's more of a plea, really. I suppose I hear that there will be messages in a national report, but a national report that summarises that position in October could be particularly unhelpful, because I think that we will have a deteriorating financial position. So if the report is about good practice and key messages, that would be one thing. If it summarises the sort of position almost a year down the road, I don't think it would be particularly helpful. And I suppose there's a plea from me to say, we know our position, what we need is help to find out how to improve that position. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sarah Jane, you wanted to come back in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just to clarify, I understand the report we're hoping to get fairly quickly, so I understand it will be in August. You're saying, you know, have conversations with treasurers around that piece of work, and with the WRJ working with the executive group treasurers to do the piece of work and it. We work in different stakeholders. It is an assurance work well for the public. So whilst we appreciate...
Sorry, Sarah Jane, do you mind starting again? Because you're starting to sound a bit like a Dalek. I think the signal has gone, okay. So apologies.
Apologies, yeah. I'm living in rural Wales, so hopefully you can hear me now. Is it still bad?
That's a little bit better, thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying that the national report will be published hopefully in August, so not too far away. And we have been working with the treasurers around that piece of work and with the WRGA. We totally accept that obviously councils know their positions, but obviously this is also a piece of work in terms of assurance and for the public as well. So, you know, I'm sure those comments still have been fed back via the treasurers, and I'll take that back as well. But just to clarify, I understand that report will be published in August in the first instance. Thank you.
Thank you. Jill, you're... Oh, thanks. Okay, lovely. So if I can ask if there are no more questions, if people can type in whether they're happy to note the report. Thank you. And Mrs. Williams, you're happy to note the report, is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move on to item number 9, the council tax reduction fraud investigations, April 2019 to March 2020. I'll now ask the Interim Chief Officer Finance, Performance and Change to present the report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Let me just get the report up. Okay, you'll be used to this report. It's an annual report that comes to the Audit Committee. It just gives you a summary of the council tax reduction fraud investigations and this particular report is from April 2019 to March 2020. It also includes a couple of other issues in terms of blue badges that I know we've brought to the Audit Committee as a verbal, but it summarises the position here. You'll recall the background to this. A lot of the investigation work for housing and council tax benefit transferred to the DWP back in 2015. So what we actually have is one fraud investigator who undertakes the investigations on CTR fraud, single person discount and blue badge misuse, but also does quite a little bit of the wider corporate fraud work as well. During the last year, there's been quite significant improvements to our response to some of this fraud work. The fraud investigators developed quite a big contact network with other fraud investigators within neighbouring authorities, and that enables us to both benchmark and to also feed off that in terms of good practice or indeed other types of investigative work that are ongoing. So he undertakes fraud awareness training sessions, both for benefit, housing options, council tax and customer services staff, and also with outside agencies. And fraud awareness also forms part of the new induction process for all benefit staff. I think the committee would want to hear, in terms of assurance, that we are still committed to maintaining and promoting zero tolerance on fraud and corruption, and as such the finance staff have produced a fraud prevention e-learning module, so thank you to Nigel's team for producing that, and that's been developed to support the anti-fraud and bribery and anti-money laundering policies that obviously have been approved by Cabinet. That e-learning module is scheduled for release in summer 2020, and I'm sure you'll be looking forward to that with some excitement, because I suspect that the Audit Committee members will be some of the first to see that and indeed take part. The fraud referrals are summarised in the table 1 that you can see in the report. They've gone down a little bit for 2019-20, but there's no significant reason that I can bring to you to say why they've gone down. I think it's just a quirk between years. It could equally go up again next year. So we continue to investigate CTR investigations based upon the information received. And I think, as I've said previously, a number of referrals are received as a result of the DWP's what we call VEP, Verify of Earnings and Pensions. And a lot of the referrals are also received via the public. But actually, so many of these relate to a DWP benefit, such as income support and job seekers allowance, so they need to be referred on to the DWP. Now, I have noticed lately that there's a lot more discussion between the DWP and the local authorities, which would obviously be of great benefit should that continue. So during 2019-20, the fraud investigator referred 32 cases to the DWP, and despite my persistence, I think, and I suspect you will ask me the question, I don't know the outcome of those referrals. We don't get feedback on that, so that's something I think that we would want to pursue as hard as possible for the future. Table 2 gives you the breakdown of the types of allegations that have come in. I wasn't going to dwell on that particularly, and you can see the number of cases that were closed and also the savings that have been achieved in Table 4 as a result of the various punitive measures that can be given out in terms of those who commit some sort of mistake, fraud, whatever you want to call those. So once they've been closed as the fraud proven, then as you can see, the level of financial penalties is shown in Table 5. I should draw your attention to the CTR prosecutions in paragraph 417. I brought this to the Audit Committee during the year, and we are the first local authority, we were the first local authority to have had a successful CTR prosecution. and we've now had a second prosecution in December 2019. And I'm hoping that that will give a very clear message to those who want to commit fraud against the council. I've referred to the joint working, which is set out in 422 and 423 and 4. And I've also brought the blue badge update to the committee during the year, but you will see the finalised statements on blue badge misuse that's set out in 428 and 429 of the report. 11 of those badges, so the 20 badges that we retained, and you'll recall this was a pilot to see whether there was any blue badge fraud. And as you can see from the 20 badges retained, 11 were considered serious enough to take forward for prosecution. And one of those is also going to the Crown Court. So that was all I wanted to say, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jill. I can see that Altaf has asked he would like to know more about non-residency, please. I don't know, Altaf, if you want to expand upon that, or Jill, if you're happy to respond without an expansion.
No, I think you might need to expand. I'm not sure, and I'm not even sure that I will know the answer, but perhaps if you explain.
No, I thought probably whether they were illegal immigrants, and that's why I put that question.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure which bit of the report you're in. I don't think we've mentioned.
It is, I think it is table 2. It says non-residency. We had 3 in 2018-19, and it has gone up to 8.
Right, unless Deb has any answer on this, I'm not sure that I know the answer to the question of non-residency.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jill, if I can just, I don't know for definite, but presumably it's relating to either somebody claiming that they live in the borough for maybe housing benefit purposes, or some council tax support reasons. So a lot of the investigations in respect of housing benefits and other benefits like council tax support. So it would be somebody who's potentially claiming to live here whereas they don't actually in reality.
It's got nothing to do with, as far as I'm aware, illegal immigrants, though.
No.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So if there are no more questions, if people can indicate if they're happy to note the report, please. Mrs. Williams, I'm assuming you're noting.
I am. Sure, thank you.
I don't know why your messages aren't coming up. It's bizarre.
Very.
Okay, right then. Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to agenda item 10, which is the statement of accounts. As I mentioned earlier, it may help you all if you have the presentation in front of you that was sent out earlier in the week or last week. So item number 10, I'll now ask the Interim Chief Officer to present this report, please.
And I shall ask Nigel if he'd like to do the honours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jill. Good afternoon all. Nigel Smith, Interim Group Manager, Chief Accountant. In terms of the report, the purpose of the report is to present to Audit Committee the unaudited Statement of Accounts for 2019-20 for noting. I will try and present that on the screen, although, as the Chair said, hopefully everyone will have the email version sent out as well, which may be easier to follow. Let's see how this works. Now, hopefully people will be able to see my screen.
Not yet.
Yep, it's there.
Yep. Oh, it's actually bigger than I thought it was going to be,
Great.
Nigel.
Very
It's
clear.
Wonderful.
big.
Yeah.
Wait until we get to some of the tables later on.
Okay.
Okay, so in terms of presenting the report, I'll do it through the presentation and try and pick up on any queries that have been passed through already. The reports are based on a regulatory framework that we have to comply with. Essentially, what the accounts do is try and set out what the council services cost in the year, where the money came from, how it was financed, and then at the end of the year, 31st of March, what the value of our assets and liabilities were. We have to follow the CIPFA Code of Practice in terms of putting the accounts together, how they look, what they contain, and all the accounting adjustments that we have to do. But that does mean then it complies with the legislative requirements. There are the Accounts and Audit Wales Amendment Regulations that set out timescales for the completion of the accounts. And they set out, and have done last year and this year, that the draft statement of accounts should be certified by the Section 151 officer by the 15th of June, and that the audited statement of accounts need to be presented to Audit Committee and certified by the Section 151 officer and chair of the committee by the 15th of September. Now we went early in terms of our preparing the accounts in the last couple of years. We've achieved the 31st of May deadline in advance of the regulations. There is a provision, however, in the regulations that says if you're not able to meet these dates, you can issue what's known as a Regulation 10 notice explaining why. As a result of the COVID pandemic and the lockdown from the 23rd of March, that obviously did have an impact on the timescales of when we were able to do the accounts. And as John mentioned earlier, we did present the accounts to the auditors on the 30th of June. So we're only 2 weeks beyond the statutory deadline. And we're not the only authority that has done that. There's quite a number in Wales who have had to do the same, and many in England as well. In terms of the actual process of putting the accounts together, that has very much been as normal. We've done very much what we've done each year in terms of putting the accounts together, other than people have had to do it remotely at home, and that has added the time sort of delays onto putting them together. But our impacts on estimates and accruals and all those kind of adjustments have been pretty much the same. The process has been well rehearsed, and that is the same process that we've followed, and that's the same for our pensions valuations and our asset valuations as well. And I think the extra time that we've had has hopefully made it a more accurate picture that we've managed to put together. Narrative reports, hopefully members have had the opportunity to go through the accounts themselves. I appreciate, certainly virtually, it's very difficult to flick back and forth on the pages of the accounts, so I'll try and just talk through them rather than referring necessarily to specific pages. But a narrative report at the beginning of the accounts provides a sort of high-level summary of the performance of the council and what the council is about. And it includes some sort of key financial performance information. The council manages an asset base, excluding the road network, of £530 million to deliver services. So this will be like our offices, our service delivery points, vehicles, equipment that we use. The reason we don't include the road network is because it's extremely difficult to value, and that is across Wales. That's nothing unique to us in Bridgend, so we don't include the roads network, even though we have a responsibility for maintaining some of those roads. One of the things that obviously has had an impact, as I mentioned, is the COVID pandemic, and that has had a huge impact on all of our lives. So the narrative report touches on that, but in a later report, the annual governance statement talks in more detail about what impact that has had on us as a council. We've got a gross revenue budget as a council of 438 million, and that's before we get grant allocations and income. So the net budget for directorates before the core funding from Welsh Government is £271 million. So that takes account of income we receive from fees and charges and specific grants. The narrative report will set out the sources of funding, but also the nature of expenditure and our net expenditure and net budget. And it has been picked up. There's a very minor 6k difference between the table that's in the narrative report and the expenditure and funding statements later in the accounts. We will amend that. Unfortunately, there was a slight adjustment on the ledger that we missed in that table in the narrative report, but that will be amended, and it's a £6,000 amendment. The year-end position was that the council achieved a 0.564 million underspend, which shows that we've managed within the cash funds that we have available to us during the year. As I mentioned, we've got £530 million of assets, which includes our operational assets. Sorry if there's a question asked, I can't see it when I'm presenting.
Altaf was just asking what is underspending.
Well, it's just that we have an annual sort of budget allocation that is cash limited in terms of what the council has to deliver its services. So it'd be various underspends and overspends across the various directorates. I don't have the detailed hand. I don't know if, Debbie, you have anything.
No worry. You can see that there is underspending in education as well as social services. Whether it is under or over, I don't know.
Can I just come in there, Chair, if that's okay?
Yes, of course, Deb. Thank you.
Yes, obviously in terms that you're talking about the revenue budget, and we provide quarterly monitoring reports to Cabinet during the year, and also these go to scrutiny committee as well. And obviously that sets out the whole range of detail on each specific directorate in terms of any underspends that they have and any overspends, and obviously the position at the end of the year. In terms of, I noticed there's a question there about specifically council-wide services. If you actually get a chance to have a look at that report, which went to Cabinet on the 30th of June, there's detail in there. I mean, one of the reasons why there was a significant underspend on council-wide services was because we received nearly £3 million worth of grants from Welsh Government during the financial year, which we hadn't anticipated, towards the additional costs of teachers' pay and pensions and fire service pensions. And we'd already built that into our medium-term financial strategy because we'd not been given any assurance that we would get the funding, so we had to be prudent to build it in. So obviously then we got the grant instead, so that generated an underspend. What we did do with that underspend was to establish an invested in communities capital fund, a one-off fund to be used to enhance kind of council-wide assets across the county borough. So there's work ongoing still, and obviously COVID's put a bit of a pause on that at the moment, to actually use that kind of more meaningfully. So whilst it's only a one-off funding, then obviously we've been able to do something more positive with it anyway. But as I say, that the report to Cabinet on the 30th of June gives much more detail on various underspends and overspends throughout the council's revenue budget.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn.
Okay, and what we will do as well is, at the time we sort of put the narrative report together, the report on the budget position wasn't available via the web, so we'll put a hyperlink in to make sure that can be clicked from the narrative report direct to that budget monitoring report. What's the narrative report also sets out is that the council has its 10-year capital programme, and again we can link that directly to the report to council in February, of £207 million. And a couple of things that happened during the year was the second extra care facility opened early in the financial year, the Porthcawl Beach Defensive Scheme was completed, and disabled facilities grant remain a key priority, whereby we make adaptations in people's homes to help them stay at home for longer. So what do each of the financial statements mean? Well, the narrative report sets out what each of those the four key statements are. So they record the income and expenditure of the council, which is the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. How this then affects the reserves of the council, both usable and unusable, and that's known as the MERS, the Movement in Reserve Statement. And then a snapshot of the council's worth, which is the balance sheet, the value of its assets, values of its liabilities. And then the cash flow shows how we've actually used our cash, how it's been generated and used during the year to pay for the services. How do the accounts link together? Well, during the year, the council's income and expenditure is recorded and monitored via the normal budget monitoring process that Debbie's just been through. And at the year end, then, the outturn shows how much the council has under or overspent its available cash resources. And just quickly flicking to the next slide, you can see that at the end of the year, that it was that 0.564 million underspend that was achieved at the year. That then is transferred into our reserves, into our general reserve. But whilst that's the budget monitoring, what would be seen at the quarterly reports to Council or Cabinet in terms of our budget performance throughout the year, for the accounts we have to do a number of statutory adjustments that makes the figures in the accounts look slightly different. And those are adjustments that take into account the use of assets. So whilst we may buy a building or have a building value that's worth, say, £4 million, we wouldn't reflect that cost in 1 year. We'd spread it over the life of that building. So if it's a 100-year life, we would show 4,000 a year or 40,000 a year, whatever it be, as a cost each year to reflect the use of that asset. Pension fund movements, adjustments for annual leave owed to staff. Now the reason we have an annual leave reserve, annual leave owed to staff each year, is because within Bridgend our staff holidays don't run from April to March, they are from birthday to birthday. So when you get to the end of March, there'll be some staff who haven't taken their due leave for their period of their birthday. So we just recognise it as a liability. The reality is we probably would never pay that to staff, in the sense that the council will continue to exist. If the council were like a business and it stopped existing, that would be a liability that we would then potentially have to pay. But it's very much an accounting adjustment from our perspective. So this tries to show how the accounts link together. So you have your income and expenditure with all these statutory adjustments, which will give you your surplus or deficit at the end of the year. And all those adjustments are then recognised in the movement in reserve statement, which fit into the balance sheet and the value and worth of the council. So in trying to link the statements back to the budget monitoring, and it's almost better to, in one sense, to work at the bottom of this slide from the £564 underspend and work upwards to get back to what the comprehensive income and expenditure statement shows. And these are all those adjustments that we have to account for. There's the transfers to earmarked reserves, there's our annual leave adjustment each year. Probably the biggest one there is the pensions, and that tends to move based on the actuary's valuation each year for us, depending on how market moves. And that's, you can see, the 18 million. We have the adjustments for capital purposes, which is the use of capital expenditure, the use of the assets, depreciation, and revaluations. And that brings us then to what is at the bottom of the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. Reserves is always of interest, and this slide just shows how the reserves have moved over the last few years. The My State School PFI is now met through the revenue grant from Welsh Government, which is why that has disappeared there at the top. Our earmarked reserves have remained relatively static. You can see there that the delegated schools balances have reduced over the last couple of years. And our council fund balance, it slightly increases year on year, which is probably within our medium-term financial strategy plan that we intend to maintain a level of council fund balance. At the moment, the council fund, which is the general fund, is there. It will cover sort of 9.5 days of operating expenditure should we lose our income, which is highly likely. But if the worst case scenario were to happen, we could continue operating just on expenditure for 9.5 days with what's in there. The Wales average is just over 10. It's about 10.15 days. That's what I've just said, really, from the previous graph, so I won't go through that again. This just splits down some of the nature of the reserves, because you often see that figure and linking to the report we heard earlier about the financial sustainability of the council. The reserves are there for specific purposes, the majority of the reserves. We have a capital programme reserve, and that is to help towards things such as the 21st century schools programmes, to help meet the cost of those, and can only be used for capital. And we have other earmarked reserves, which are specific reserves set aside for specific purposes, and that could include digital transformation, provision for insurance costs, and various other specific elements. This provides why we kind of set up some of those grants or those reserves. I mean, the capital programme funding from Welsh Government has been reduced over the last sort of number of years, which is why we have that capital expenditure reserve to mitigate these reductions that we've seen in the grant from Welsh Government. I say excluding the capital and service reconfiguration reserves, sort of generally our earmarked reserves have remained fairly consistent over the last few years. although we've seen them reduced slightly in 1920, which is probably as we would expect as those specific reasons that funding is used to meet. There are a number then of key disclosures within the statements. There are revenue disclosures, i.e. what we spend on a day-to-day basis. The expenditure and income analysed by nature. In the account sets out how we spend our money, whether it's on employees, other service expenses, interest payments, and precepts and levies to the police and fire service, for example. We also do analysis of government grants, which sets out some of the key grants that we receive, specific grants. We provide information about the PFI, the My State School PFI scheme, and also budgets that we pool with health and other organisations to provide services jointly. Details of officers' remuneration is included, and as I just said, the revenue reserves are also shown in a bit more detail. In terms of capital, this does cover spending on assets such as roads to an extent, major renovation of buildings, redevelopment, and it's expected that those would last for quite a number of years, which is why we then allocate the cost over a period of time to recognise the use of those assets. The nature of the assets is broken down in the accounts between operational assets, land and buildings, and vehicles. And the capital spend for the year was 22.822 million, and the account set out how we funded that through capital grant, through specific grants, revenue contributions, and borrowing. There are then some details of movements on capital usable reserves, which essentially is the capital receipts reserve, and also the unusable reserves, those that we can't touch. They're accounting adjustments and not available for the council to be able to spend. Open it up for any questions then. What I'll do is I'll close the slideshow, and you probably get a box that says hide stage to get back to the meeting.
Thank you, Nigel. Before I ask if anybody's got any questions, can I first of all just thank you and the team for all the hard work in getting the accounts completed in such difficult circumstances. I know it's been a really tough time. I also personally found them, I don't know whether it's becoming a little bit more familiar, but I also found them easier to read this year with different language, and I just really wanted to recognise that and thank you again for all of the efforts. So thank you. Can I ask if anybody has any questions, please? Yeah, Alex, do you want to go in now, please?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Just a quick question. You mentioned that the settlement from the Welsh Government hasn't been delivered yet. And just a quick question, when are you expected to know about the 2021-22 settlement?
And do you want me to pick that up, Chair?
Yes, please, Jill. Thank you.
We haven't had the timetable yet, Councillor Williams. Last year, of course, it was late. We're anticipating an autumn statement by the government. And so, unless Deb's heard anything otherwise, I'm anticipating that we'll be back to the usual October for draft statement, and the same dates as usual. I'm not anticipating a late statement, but I have to say that was probably my thoughts before we went into the COVID situation and indeed recovery. And obviously there's an awful lot of discussions going on in terms of financing of various streams of COVID. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was change, but at the moment I'm anticipating that it's the same timetable as usual, unless Deb has heard anything different.
Deb has typed.
Oh no, she said nothing.
Yeah. So okay, is that okay, Alex? Or Deb, did you want to come in again?
Sorry, Chair. No, I was just going to say, no, we haven't heard anything. I mean, Welsh Government are collecting the data off us in terms of our spend for 2019-20 at the same time as they would ordinarily do. But as you say, obviously, the situation has changed now. So, I mean, they're delaying a lot of our statutory returns slightly, obviously because of the current circumstances, which may impact upon the deadline. What we would normally have is a draft settlement early October and then a final settlement in December. But at the moment, we've clearly not had any indication as to whether that will be, you know, the same or much delayed like it was in this financial year.
Thank you, Deb. Paul, you've asked to come in.
Hello, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you now. Thanks.
Yeah. Could somebody just explain the situation with the PFI surrounding Maesteg School? It was in one of them slides there. It was mentioned that the Welsh Government is now taking charge of it or something. So could you just explain that to us, please?
Nigel, do you want to come in on this and explain the PFI? I'm not sure if that's got confused with MMI, but
would you like me to explain it, Chair?
Go on then,
Deb.
Please do, Deb. Yeah.
Okay. The PFI was set up a number of years ago, and when we originally had the school built, and then we have to pay an annual unitary charge to the provider over the period of 25 years. So they built the school and we basically kind of renting it from them for the 25-year period, after which it becomes our asset, you know, and it's fully belongs to the council. It's a bit like paying a mortgage, really. At the beginning, when the school was first built, then Welsh Government would give us an annual grant towards, it's around just over 80% of the cost, which would be to fund basically the capital element of the building, and then any services that are provided, such as maintenance, which we would have normally paid for in a school, we had to contribute the balance. So it was a grant, so we would get grant funding every year. After a number of years, they decided to roll that into the local government settlement. So when we get our settlement every year, there is an amount included in that, and other authorities who've got PFI schemes have got the same. There's an element included within that, and the way the funding works is that gradually reduces over the period of it started off as quite a high proportion, and then it dwindles over time. So they paid us more than we needed initially, and now they pay us kind of less than we need. We pay the same amount every year, so we've got a sinking fund. We did have a sinking fund to manage that. But as I say, we don't get it as a grant anymore. It's in our settlement, and at the end of the 25-year period, Welsh Government will stop paying us, because we will stop paying the provider for the school, and the school will become ours. So I don't know if I've explained that very well. If you've got any further questions, just ask.
No, it's okay. Thank you. Thanks for the explanation. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any further questions on the accounts, or is everybody happy to note the accounts? Please, if you can put in the box if you're happy to note. Mrs. Williams, happy to note?
Happy to note, Chair. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Great, that's everybody then. So audited accounts noted. So if we can move on to agenda item 11, which is the annual governance statement for 2019-20, and I'll now ask Jill to present this report.
Sorry, Chair, I think Nigel's doing this one as well. I would hate to steal his thunder.
Absolutely. So, Nigel.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank
yes,
you.
I'll run through this. The purpose of the report is to present to Audit Committee the Annual Governance Statement 2019-20 for approval and inclusion with the Unaudited Statement of Accounts 2019-20. Now, I know when we sent the accounts out a little bit earlier for members to have a look at it, it already had the annual governance statement appended to it. But they are, in effect, two separate items. We put them together because they just sit quite nicely together in a single document. We are required by regulation to review, take an annual review of our governance and report on internal control. and there is a SIPFA code of recommended practice that we follow that sets out what needs to be included. The annual governance statement includes sort of the council's governance principles that are in line with the code of practice. Obviously, the impact of COVID, we've had to consider how we operate, how things are run, and we've put in quite a bit of information about the impact of COVID-19 and the need to move to electronic meetings, for example, such as this one, and we can make sort of some additions as to the legislation that underpins that, but that is the Local Authorities Meetings Wales regulations, and that applied effective from the 22nd of April 2020. So there's some areas where we can add a bit more information to explain what the process is and obviously how today's meeting is working. The annual governance statement will include an action plan. It will include actions that we've undertaken from last year's annual governance, some of the issues that were raised and what we've done to address them, and a review will pick up some actions that we'll do moving forward. So hopefully members have had a chance to review the annual governance statement. If there's any questions.
Could I ask Alex Williams to come in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to refer members to page 219 of the pack on the annual governance statement, and inevitably our role as audit committee members are to be critical friends of the authority in terms of corporate governance. So I'd just like to ask for comment from the auditors on what their perception is of Bridgen's governance arrangements throughout COVID-19. I've expressed these concerns to the leadership of the council in 2 separate emails in the past, and the chair of this committee has been copied in. Now, you mentioned that virtual meetings have been allowed to take place since the 22nd of April, I think, when subordinate legislation was passed by the Senedd. But I have to say that the local authority hasn't actually made the most of those, the ability to use those virtual technology to undertake meetings. And I have to say that it is quite disappointing that we've only had an audit committee meeting once in 6 months, whereas other local authorities have held special audit committee meetings in the meantime. I'm just wondering whether you think that presents a corporate risk at all to the local authority. And I'd also like to comment on the statement in the report that a COVID-19 group has been set up with members of CMB and the Cabinet. But I suppose it's unfortunate, I think, that no elected members from an opposition political party, or perhaps the scrutiny chairs, or even the chair of this committee, was part of that role to ensure that corporate governance and the risks associated with COVID-19 were fully addressed. So I think it does present a risk going forward, both financially and in terms of governance, if my concerns weren't rehearsed during this meeting. So I'd appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Alex. So, Sarah Jane, are you happy to come back on that, please?
Hi, yes, Chair. You mentioned.
Sorry, Sarah Jane. Sorry, Sarah Jane. Your signal seems to have gone again. I don't know.
Yeah, can you hear me?
That's a bit better now. Thank you.
Yes, as you mentioned, Councillor, the new regulations that allowed virtual meetings to happen. So, many councils are now doing that. What I would say as part of I mentioned earlier, the recovery planning work that we'll be doing, one of the aspects of that arrangements. So, different councils are at different places around that, but in terms of pace and that kind of thing, and I think one of the challenges is around the opportunities also to do things differently, and we touched on scrutiny earlier. At this stage, I think we need to be realistic and pragmatic as well on this. In terms of the ability for some councils did carry on with virtual meetings and others didn't. It is on a case-by-case basis. At this, we will be looking at some assurance, so we'll be looking at as part of that recovery planning.
Thank you for that, Sarah Jane. And Mark, if you just want to respond to that from an internal audit point of view as well, and then we will move on for any other questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, and just for the record, this is Mark Thomas, Head of the Regional Internal Audit Service. Just by way of comparison, really, this will be the first audit committee up at the four authorities that I cover to be held. So Bridgend is a little bit further ahead in that respect. Another audit committee, another 2 audit committees next week, and another one beginning of August. I think it's fair to say that all local authorities have been under significant pressure in terms of dealing with the COVID pandemic. So it's new territory for everyone, really. So that's obviously been the focus of the attention of senior management and senior leadership within all local authorities. So while some authorities elsewhere have had meetings a little bit earlier, I don't think Bridgend is in any way up to step with the ones that I deal with. As I say, this is the first audit committee for me to attend, so I haven't got any particular concerns around that. I think if we weren't holding any meetings until September, and I think then there could be legitimate points made, but I think the time is about right with the accounts sort of ready to be looked at and so on, and the number of annual reports. I think the timing is probably right given the circumstances.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sarah Jane. I hope that addresses your or answers to your concerns, Alex. So can I ask if anybody else has got any other questions, or if we can approve and agree the inclusion of the statement of annual government statement in the accounts? If you are happy for that to happen, if you can just put approve and agree in the comments box. Thank you. Altaf, I'll take it that the noted means approve and agree from yourself. Oh, approve, thank you. Absolutely, Alex, for your comments to be minuted and the response from both Sarah Jane and Mark Thomas, so yeah. I had a message from Bridie saying that her computer was about to go into reboot, so I think that's and then just Mrs. Williams, I haven't seen any typing from you.
Chair, I would like to raise a couple of points, please.
Absolutely.
This does relate to my questions, which I actually sent in already, so it's a bit of a repetition, but please bear with me. I think we need to bear in mind that we are approving this statement, this annual governance statement, and hence, really, I suppose I am being a little bit more forensic regarding it than usual. Pages 218 and 219 they are now, but in our previous version that we received, they were different page numbers. So just to explain that. But really, I am looking for something similar to Councillor Williams, in that I'm looking for more clarity and more definition in those 2 pages. It isn't absolutely clear, when the COVID-19 group was set up. It isn't made clear when the new powers were given, and there is just a lack of, I suppose, definition and transparency, in my view, on those 2 pages of the report. And it is in the same area that Councillor Williams has referred to, so I won't go on at any length, except to say that those 2 pages and the contents of the report in those pages just needs to be sharpened up quite a bit, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Jill, you wanted to come in?
Yes, just in response, I think, to Mrs. Williams, and thank you for the helpful questions that you did send in advance. They were really, really useful, I have to say. And in looking at those, I think we did look at the clarity of when the regulations came in. The COVID recovery was set up by the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee only last Monday. So that has yet to start functioning. And I think that I think you're making a really useful point, which is, having looked at your questions and put those dates in, it seems the logical conclusion probably to put those into the AGS now, to make sure that there is clarity about when the regulations came in, if we don't think that we've got that clearly set out. And probably because COSC had to set up that recovery panel, we probably haven't got that in because the papers went out before that. So perhaps if you allow us to reflect on that and perhaps update that for clarity.
Thank you, Jill. That sounds very sensible. Thank you. Are you happy with that, Mrs. Williams?
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
Great. Okay. Oh, there's two more people typing. Sarah Jane, you wanted to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just quickly to mention in relation to Councillor Williams' comment around sort of democracy, just to make you aware that we have recently done a blog relating to this, actually, which is available on our website. So that does give a bit of overall kind of picture in terms of where councils are. So members might be interested in that. So just wanted to signpost you to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right then, so as that has now been, that agenda item has been approved and agreed, I'll move on to item number 12, which is the Porthcawl Harbour Return 2019-20, and I'll now ask, I presume it's Nigel who's going to be presenting that, but somebody from Finance to represent that, please.
Yes, we'd like to keep Nigel working all the way through the meeting.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair, thank you, Jill. The purpose of this report is to present to Audit Committee the unaudited Porthcawl Harbour Return 1920 for approval. This return is done annually and is brought to the committee for approval, as the harbour does not have its own committee, so this committee approves that return. It has been subject to internal audit, and internal audit have signed it off, but it still now needs to go through to Audit Wales for an external audit. Should there be no issues or amendments found with the return, this will be the final approval, the final time it will come to this committee. Should we need to make any adjustments, then it will have to return in September for a second formal approval. Of course, our expectation is that there will be no amendments necessary, so that this would be the approval of the harbour return. Similar to the statement of accounts, the return was not completed until 30th, or not signed off by the Chief Officer till 30th of June, but that was covered by the same Regulation 10 notice that we issued for the statement of accounts. So there's no concerns there. The harbour achieved a balanced position at 31st of March 20. It generated just under £263,000 in fees, primarily for boat berthing and mooring, and the main expenditures are staffing costs and the depreciation or use of the harbour assets. The value of the harbour, including kiosks, slipway, at 31st of March was just over 3.1 million. If there's any questions, happy to take any questions.
If so, any questions? I can see two people are typing at the moment. I don't know which two are typing. So Bridie, all right, you've come back again, Bridie. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Paul Davis. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, can hear you. Thank you,
thanks,
Paul.
Chair. Just a quick query on the harbour. It's a separate issue really, but it's something came up in my constituency work recently. Are people mooring there allowed to live on the boats that are there, or are they only for mooring only? Can I ask that question in this meeting, Chair?
You can ask, but I'm not sure that anybody here would actually know the answer. But I don't think it's an audit committee of an audit committee item. So I think you're gonna. I don't know quite where you would go for that, Paul. the response to that, but I don't think it's something that is in the control of or in the gift of this committee.
Okay, I withdraw it then, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Somebody in communities would be able to answer that, Councillor Davis.
I don't know if you heard that, Paul, but Jill thinks somebody in communities would be able to answer that. Great. So could I now ask if there are no further questions, if people are happy to approve the Porthcawl Harbour return? Great, thank you very much. So that is approved. So we can now move on to item number 13. So Nigel, you're going to get a rest now. So the annual internal audit report 2019-20. So I'll now ask the head of Regional Internal Audit Service to present this report. Thank you. Mark.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members again. Yes, just to way of introduction really with the report. This is obviously the key report for internal audit of the year, and the purpose there you'll see on paragraph 1.1 is to provide the head of internal audit's annual opinion on the council's control environment in relation to governance, risk management and internal control, and to inform the audit committee of the work and performance of internal audit for the financial year 1920. You'll see there in section 3, background, paragraph 3.1, the public sector internal audit standards require the head of internal audit to provide an annual report to support the annual governance statement. So you will have already seen in the item earlier on that the head of audit's annual opinion is reflected in the annual governance statement, and the annual report should cover those 5 bullet points there. So this report you received this afternoon is in accordance with the public sector internal audit standards. As I've already outlined, paragraph 3.3 just mentions there that the 2019 internal audit plan was submitted to the audit committee for approval in April 2019, and this report identifies the work that's been done during the year. If I can refer you to section 4 of the report on page 248, the internal audit report is attached as Appendix A from page 251 on, and this summarises the work that we've undertaken, including any counter fraud work that we've undertaken, recommendations made, and any control issues identified. So because it's the annual report, I'd like to take members through a little bit of detail in the main report. But before I do that, just if I could refer you to paragraph 4.4 on the same page 248, just basically the headline, taking into account the results of the internal audit reviews completed during 2019-20 and the recommendations made, and considering other sources of assurance, the head of internal audit's annual opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of the council's framework of governance, risk management and internal control for 2019-20 is of reasonable assurance. No significant cross-cutting control issues have been identified that would impact on the council's overall control environment, and the weaknesses identified are service specific. So it's a positive report overall, Chair, but if I'd like to take members through now through the detailed report step by step, if I may. On page 251 or 252, I should say, the report there sets up different sections. Introduction, which I've already covered in my preamble. Section 2 then gives a summary of the reviews undertaken and gives members the different categories of opinions that we give when we undertake an audit report. So that goes into a little bit of detail there. If I move over the page onto page 253 and table 1, that sets out the audit opinions that we've given based on the audit reviews that we undertook in 2019-20. So if I could draw your attention there to the last but one end column on the right hand side, you will see there that the opinion of 7 substantial opinions were given and 22 reasonable opinions. That's a total of 83% substantial or reasonable opinions, and then 6 opinions of limited, which was 17%. So that's a positive reflection on control, internal controls within the authority, I feel. As I mentioned there, the limited areas are mentioned in the next section, so I'll go through those in a second. But we also place reliance on the work of some other bodies, such as Wales Audit Office, to avoid duplication. So if we're able to draw on assurance from other bodies or other work that's been done, we also do that as well. Section 3 of the report on page 254, as I just mentioned, identifies any reports that we've undertaken with a limited opinion. Members will be familiar with quite a few of these because they've already been reported during the year, so I won't go through those in detail, but I'll just mention a couple of areas that hadn't been reported previously. One was around disabled facilities grants, and it mentioned that the review identified that although some improvements have been made which have reduced waiting times, targets are still being missed and processes still need to be improved. And in common with any limited opinion report, that we will be following up on this area alongside any other limited reports during the course of this financial year. The next one I wanted to mention was 3.5 contract management. Basically, we looked at 12 contracts with the highest cumulative spend in the previous financial year, which did not appear to have a contract entered within the corporate contracts register, so we selected those for testing. A limited opinion was provided as although elements of compliance with the contract procedure rules and associated procurement guidance are operating effectively, opportunities for the introduction or improvement of internal controls of some contracts have been identified. So again, we are looking at capital contracts specifically this year, so if there's any follow-up that we need to do associated with that piece of work, we will do that as well. And the next one I just wanted to mention is paragraph 3.6 there, home to school transport. It mentions there that it knows there's been significant overspends against this budget previously, and it's been looked at in terms of discretionary elements and route planning and so on to see if that can be addressed. But we did identify some areas for improvement there, such as improving efficiency and service quality, such as documenting contract variations, retaining supplier agreements, as well as strengthening the DBS monitoring process currently in place. It was recognised that although areas for improvement have been identified, and a number of areas of good practice were also identified, such as undertaking consistent procurement exercises and increasing income by selling surplus seats on transport. So they were the limited areas that that I thought I'd just bring to members' attention over and above the ones that members would already be aware of. Section 4 of the report relates to recommendations made, as you would expect, and members will be more than familiar with this. At the conclusion of any audit, we make recommendations. It's very rare that we don't make any recommendations, and we classify those as either high, medium or low in terms of, or merits attention in terms of priority. So table 2 on page 256 just gives a breakdown there of the number and percentage of the different categories of recommendation. So you can see that there were 6 high priority and 97 medium priority recommendations made during the year. As I've already mentioned, any that are associated with a limited report will obviously be followed up as part of that process. So 41 of the 97 medium recommendations will be followed up as part of that follow-up process anyway. Now, the remaining ones, I can just give a sort of a breakdown there. 15 we know have been implemented based on the information we've received from the service areas. 8 are not due yet because the date that was agreed in the action plan we haven't got to that point yet. 15, so that's 1-5, relate to schools. Obviously, schools have been closed for the majority of the last number of months, so we will be following up probably with schools in September when hopefully things get back to some sort of normality. And there's another 18 that we are chasing up with services on progress. So that's something we are monitoring, and we will feed back to the committee in due course. If I can move on to briefly touch on counter fraud work, and Jill has already sort of covered some of this really, and the work specifically done in relation to housing benefit and council tax reduction and so on. Internal audit do get does get referrals in relation to specific issues on occasion. One such one, as I mentioned there in 5.1, a member of the public felt that there was information that had been shared with the council that had then been used to create potentially a fraudulent bank account application. We looked at that quite closely, and there was actually no evidence to support that allegation in any way. So the complaint was withdrawn. However, there were some things that we identified to improve control in those areas. 5.2, members will be aware of this one. It was to do with a historic procurement purchasing card fraud that was members are fully aware of, and that was drawn to members' attention in terms of the case went to court and the former employee was found guilty of fraud in order to repay the council the amount identified as stolen and given a suspended sentence and community service. So that's just a way of recapping on that particular one. One of the rules for internal audit is linked to the National Fraud Initiative. So Joan in particular, Joan Davis, that you know, in particular has been key in sort of helping Bridgend do this piece of work. So we facilitate the upload of data, user account management and so on, provide assistance and advice to officers reviewing the data matches. So during 1920, from that work, so it's not directly as a result of internal audit do some of it, but it's really reflective of the work done by services in Bridgend. £24,000 worth of recoverable fraud errors were identified through the initiative, along with what the NFI calculate has been £262,000 worth of notional savings. So that isn't so much real money, it's a calculation that NFI carry out in terms of the potential value of that over a period of time. But we will be coming back in September with a report to Audit Committee with more detail around this and in relation to the National Fraud Initiative. And we work with the fraud investigator quite closely as well, and we sort of feed off each other and share information and assist one another in the work that we carry out. Okay, section 6 then, page 258 of the report just relates to some elements relating to the performance of the service. One of the things that we do as a matter of course is issue client satisfaction questionnaires to the services that we've conducted an audit at. So this gives you the questions that we tend to ask there as part of that process. And paragraph 6.2 and the little bubbles there, quotes relating from two of the examples that we've had back. So they are generally very positive and supportive of the process that we employ and the way that the audits are conducted. I think it's worth mentioning perhaps the numbers that we've had in recent times has dropped off slightly, and one of the things we hope to be able to do with the new audit software that we will be implementing shortly is to automate that process for chasing up sort of responses, because it's important that we do get that feedback so we can learn from the feedback that we get back from services. Moving on to section 7, obviously without appropriately qualified and trained and competent staff, then we wouldn't be able to conduct our audits effectively. So that's really important. So that just gives a flavour there on section 7, the type of training that staff are undergoing. We've got one member of staff who's coming hopefully towards the end of his SIP for Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy qualification. So he's very close to becoming a fully qualified accountant, and we've got another member of staff who's started the process of the passing the exams for the Institute of Internal Auditors, and that's something we encourage and will encourage further with the shared service. But alongside that is obviously continuing professional development and general awareness of what's happening in the public sector and local government, particularly. And a lot of this now is done online, not just since COVID, but pre-COVID as well, in terms of webinars and all sorts of training that gives a flavour of the training that staff have undertaken over the last 12 months. Section 8 relates to some of the key performance measures and benchmarking. Now, this is always historic, it's always a year out of date, because in terms of comparing with other authorities by the information, the time that's collated, it's about a year out of date. But so it's talking about 2018-19 percentage of planned audits complete, for example. That went up from the previous year, and it is higher than the Welsh average. And figure for we have got a figure for this year in relation to completion of the plan, and that's currently at 88% for what we were able to do for 1920. So just to give you a flavour there, but I've got no particular concerns over the information that that's there in front of you and how it compares with other authorities. Section 9 refers to the public sector internal audit standards that I referred to earlier, but one of the things I have to do as the head of internal audit is give a commentary in relation to compliance with the public sector internal audit standards. They're formally reviewed once every 5 years by an external assessor, so that'll be done next in 2022. But in terms of compliance for the previous 12 months, no significant changes have occurred in respect of our working practices since the regional audit service has come into being. As a result, the service continues to conform to the standards during 2019-20. Okay, section 10, I thought I would just give you a flavour of the progress in relation to the regional audit service. I give a presentation to members before Christmas in terms of progress at that point, but this is just to give a flavour really from an annual perspective. The service has identified a vision which is sent out there in paragraph 10.2 and how it wants to be regarded. So the vision is to be the provider of internal audit services of choice to the public sector in South Wales and be a centre of excellence for public sector internal auditing, and we want to be a service that's regarded as professional, approachable, flexible, independent, but internal to the organisation and a critical friend. Paragraph 10.3 then identified 5 immediate priorities for the service identified at the start of the year, which we were able to meet. And then a further number of priorities, 3 priorities were identified for the first 12 months of the service relating to the structure and ICT solution and arrangements, and identify and evaluate approaches, methodologies for each team, and identify most appropriate to adopt. So in relation to the first one, a new structure has now been agreed, so that will be implemented once the restrictions around pandemic allow. New ICT equipment was purchased earlier on in the year for all staff to ensure consistency and compatibility, so that was done. And new software solution that I mentioned earlier, that's also been procured, and we will be implementing that probably from September on. So that's the plan there. In terms of evaluating different approaches and methodologies, we've already started that work, and it'll really carry on in earnest really in time for the new audit software, because we will have to adopt common approaches to how we do things for that to get the full effect and the full benefit from that software. Okay, section 11, and I've already sort of given the headline really in terms of the opinion there for you when I did the introduction essentially, but the opinion statement for 2019-20 in relation to risk management, governance and internal controls is based on looking at the internal control framework, and at the bottom of page 263 it sets out there the things that we take into account in arriving at that opinion. So if I turn over the page again on 264, it's broken down into the 3 elements: risk management, governance and internal control. So based on the information that we've got and the work that we've done and what we're aware of, I'm happy to be able to give a reasonable assurance in relation to risk management, governance arrangements and internal control based on the work that we've done. And just to turn over the page is the overall opinion, combining those 3 into an overall reasonable assurance opinion. So I'll pause that at that point, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. Can I ask if anybody has any questions, please, if you can indicate in the box. Mrs. Williams, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. You're anticipating well. Thank you.
No, I could just see that you were trying to type, so yeah. that comes up, but whatever you're trying to type doesn't. So, well, yeah.
Okay. I have a question on section 3, please. I would like more information, and I'm going to ask Mark if he's happy to provide it. It's in relation to the contract management review, and I think we would benefit from knowing more about the services involved in these contracts, and perhaps also some idea of the financial amounts involved. So that would be helpful. I don't mean now. I don't mean to receive this now. I mean to receive this, please. Perhaps by the next meeting. That would be helpful to me. Thank you.
You are, yeah. That's fine. That's fine. I'm glad you said you don't want it now, because I would struggle to be able to give it to you straight away. So no, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Chair. That's it.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Can I just ask a question? And apologies, Mark, I've only just thought of this. With the change in ways of working by the council across all departments, is there more proactive engagement with internal audit, with any big changes in processes, to make sure that internal audit don't have any initial concerns as to the change in practices? Is that engagement something you would welcome or not?
Well, absolutely. Obviously prevention is always better than cure, in the sense of introducing new processes. And one of the things that we've been quite heavily involved with, and it's been helpful working across four authorities, for example, the introduction of the various grants to businesses that really sort of launched in very quick time back in, when was it, end of March, beginning of April. So looking at some of the controls in relation to those, whilst the money needed to go out to businesses as quickly as possible to support those businesses, you also needed to have adequate controls in place. So we were proactive in working with the relevant departments, not just in Bridgend but in the other three authorities as well, and identifying what we thought were sensible and reasonable controls. So that was done early on, and sharing that information, including any intelligence on the types of frauds that were coming about nationally, because there were numbers of examples of fraudsters, if you like, impersonating companies and trying to put fraudulent claims in relation to significant amounts of money, really. So I'm not aware of any that have succeeded in any of the four authorities that I'm involved with, but there will be. This has been a certain amount of data matching already been done as well to get extra assurance, and the National Fraud Initiative will be undertaking a further exercise. So there may be some things that will come out of that, but yeah, one or two authorities elsewhere maybe weren't so diligent in some of the checks that they were undertaking, and as I understand it, have been subject of some fraud, but I'm not aware of anything significant in any of the four authorities that I work in.
Lovely, thank you very much. So if there aren't any other questions from anybody, if everybody can indicate that they're happy that we've given due consideration to this report from Mark, and thank you for the report, Mark, and that you're happy to move on to the next agenda item. So if you are happy, can you type due consideration given, please? Yeah, DCG works. I should have thought about that. Thank you. Great. Thank you very much, everybody. So now moving on to item number 14, which is the Regional Internal Audit Service Charter for 2020 to 21. And Mark, if I can ask you to present this report. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This one will be quite a bit shorter, I would imagine, Chair, but basically on an annual basis that we need to get the Internal Audit Charter agreed by each authority. So this is a step forward, really, because this will be a consistent document across all four councils as part of the regional setup. So Bridgend will be the first authority to consider this document. But essentially, under the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, we need to have a charter in place setting out a number of key important aspects. In terms of the document itself, from paragraph 3.7, the charter is split into the following sections: 1, purpose, authority and responsibility; independence and objectivity of internal audit; I can't even say the word proficiency; do professional care; and also quality assurance and improvement programme. And the Charter also has 2 annexes containing a glossary of terms and the code of ethics that internal auditors are expected to follow. It's a comprehensive document. I've taken hopefully the best elements from what existed in the previous charters at the respective authorities and made sure that it's in compliance with the public sector internal audit standards. As I say, it is pretty comprehensive. It does set out our powers and responsibilities, and it's important that the audit committee consider the charter and, if happy, approve the charter, and hopefully then it'll be received in the same way across the other 3 authorities in the region. So I'll pause there rather than going through the detail of the charter, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark, because everybody's had the opportunity to read it. So can I ask if there are any questions, or if people are happy that we have considered and it can be approved? Oh, due consideration given. Thank you, Tom. Great. Mrs. Williams, I haven't seen you typing anything. Are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much. So that charter is approved. Thank you, Mark. So we'll now move on to item number 15, which is the forward work programme for 2020-21. And I'll ask, is it Jill or Mark who's going to take us through this?
It's actually neither, it's Debbie. So if that's okay, Chair?
Yes, of course.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, what you would have had in previous meetings would be an informal formal work programme, just basically from the internal audit perspective. But what we've tried to do from this meeting really is to bring all the reports that we know about together to give you a fuller picture going forward, so you know what's coming from Audit Wales, what's coming from the finance section, what's coming from internal audit, and anything else that we think that you need to know about. So to give you a fuller picture and enable you to obviously have confidence in what's coming up and have some advance notice then really. So obviously the purpose of the report is to seek approval for the proposed forward work programme for 2021. We would have normally brought this to Audit Committee in April, but obviously that was cancelled, so we're bringing it now for the rest of the financial year, and we will obviously update it as we go along and add any further reports that we need to do. So section 3.1 outlines, as you would normally have in this report, the core functions of an effective audit committee, and I won't go through those in detail, but obviously then in paragraph 3.2 outlines what the main kind of what an effective audit committee will do in terms of raising the profile of internal control, risk management and financial reporting issues. So in terms of the current situation, what we've done is we've tried to identify in section 4.2 in the table what the proposed agenda items that we have currently for September are for the next meeting, and they're listed there. And then as an appendix, we've identified the an outline of the proposed reports that we will be bringing to the meetings also in November and then in January 2021. There are some obviously recurrent reports that we will be bringing, such as the Audit Committee Action Record and the Audit Wales Audit Committee update, but then obviously there are specific ones that will be only brought to certain committees. If you look at the reports for September, you'll notice that we'll have the final statement of accounts, as we've mentioned. There is a report on the disabled facilities grants that we're hoping to bring there, and obviously officers. Sorry, you've probably heard the ice cream ban outside.
I'll have a 99.
Yeah. And obviously then, the internal audits, audit plan and their work for the rest of the year. So just basically to give you an outline of and a flavour of the reports that we will be bringing coming up over the next few meetings, and for you to give that consideration to see if there are any other reports that you would want to bring, and any particular officers that you would want to invite to those meetings. So the recommendation is that you consider that and approve it for the rest of the financial year.
Thank you very much. Before I bring Alex in, there's one question I have, and that's around the corporate risk assessment. Now, normally in September, that is, it's a review, as it's only a 6-monthly review, but an awful lot has happened, and a lot of new risks have come in because of COVID. So it's just really wanting to make sure that the Corporate Management Board will have had time to look at that and provide some updates, because I think that's going to be quite a big bit of work, but it's necessary. I just wanted to get your comments on that before I bring Alex in, please.
I think Jill's going to respond to this, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, I guess we've always said that the risk register is a living, breathing document and moves with the new risks that emerge. I think that probably underestimates the last 3 months.
Yeah.
So in some ways, what we would have had and discussed at length in April and taken on a daily basis, I think, to Gold Command meetings in terms of risks probably aren't the same as we would now have. So we've had various sessions at CMB which has covered things like the impact on progress of service change, the impact on delivery of the programme, and indeed the capital programme is coming back to Council in July. Things like supply chain and contracts and PPE. I mean, we were at a stage probably in April where that was probably one of the highest risks that we had. We are now in a slightly different situation, but nevertheless, PPE for the next 18 months still remains a risk. The impact of fraud, I mean, never waste a crisis would be probably one of the fraudsters' mottos, and we have had various attacks on the network and phishing and all sorts of things, trying to get business grants out of the system. So a huge uptake in fraud attempts. The digital agenda we've discussed, and I mean that was moved from the emergency situation of people having to work on online to what can we now put together that takes advantage of those opportunities and all the rest. So we're in the process of revising the risk register to come back to September, but I think I have never seen risks change probably so fast and with such polarized polarized views, I think, throughout the period, and the sustainability of the financial position that we've already talked about, which in March wasn't critical. When we get to July, it becomes a little bit more precarious, and by the time we get to September, it may be number 1, PPE may be number 10. So all those conversations have been going on, and I think you'll find that the Gold Command, and I know Debbie's attended those and can sort of verify, I think, has been focused on risks. It was on a daily basis for 2 months, and that in effect was our risk register. It's now gone to weekly, went to twice weekly, and obviously now we're into the recovery period, so it's probably now time to reassess out of an emergency situation to what are the continuing risks. So I've just given you a flavour, I suppose, of the different conversations and the fact that it's being updated, as are the departmental risks, I should say, on a sort of monthly basis.
Okay, I think then that from a committee perspective, and I'd appreciate comments from the rest of the committee, but my recommendation would be is that we're still in a very difficult time for the council, for officers to, I think whatever document comes to us in September is going to be more of a working document rather than, and I think we're going to have to take a pragmatic view on it. So that it is a discussion and a just really to reflect the risks that are perceived to be the most critical at that moment in time, accepting that they may well change within 2 or 3 weeks, and particularly if there is a second spike. So can I just ask whether people agree with that? Oh, so Alex, you've already come back in agreement with that, but I think we would be unrealistic to expect a finalised document, but I think from an audit committee's perspective, we do need to have something that we can look at to say, yes, these are the critical risks at this moment in time when we're in September. Also accepting that the document will have been prepared a fortnight beforehand for circulation, and things may well have changed by the time of the meeting. Yeah. So as long as we can all agree that we're pragmatic, can I just ask if everybody can come back on that, or the audit committee can come back to say they're in agreement, because that then I give some flexibility to the officers to actually work towards this in the future.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Yeah, I think everybody's in agreement with that. So, and Mark Thomas is also typing. Just wait for that to come through. All right, Chair. Yeah, please do add something, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, okay. Yeah. No, that's all it was, just to sort of follow in from the points that were made, really. Normally, we would have put up an internal audit plan for the year by now, as I sort of touched on a little bit earlier, really. We've delayed things slightly because we wanted to consult with senior officers around what was feasible in terms of delivering the internal audit plan for the rest of the year. For example, obviously, I mentioned schools earlier, but establishments, internal auditors going out to establishments such as that is, for the foreseeable future, won't be happening, so we've got to explore different ways of doing things. New risks have emerged that were touched on earlier. So what we've done is we consulted on the draft plan as was prepared back in March, obviously before COVID. We've added additional risks to get views from officers around those, and then we'll be coming back with a proposed internal audit plan in September. So hopefully that will also take account of new risks that have emerged over the last few months, and obviously there needs to be flexibility in that plan as well, because none of us are certain what might happen in a few months' time as well in terms of a second wave or anything else. So that can be perhaps fed into the conversation as well.
Thank you, Mark. And Mrs. Williams, you wanted to come in?
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you. I totally agree with everything you've said there. This is a much more immediate and short-term, I guess, hopefully short-term review of the risk position. One of the things I would add is that possibly we need to have the assessment framed with more basic objectives than the 3 or the 4 very strategic objectives that we're used to seeing. I would just ask perhaps that when we're preparing the report, that lower level perhaps objectives ought to be considered. Thank you.
When you say you want lower level objectives to be considered, I'm just concerned that as to how lower level you're looking to go, Mrs. Williams. If you could just provide some clarity on that so that the officers can consider it. Is that okay?
Yes. For example, one of the corporate objectives is smarter use of resources. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we, because we're going to be looking at a more urgent and basic risk review, we need those objectives broken down a little more. Like, for example, financial sustainability.
I think financial stability is already one of the corporate objectives.
Okay, possibly it is, but what I'm saying is there are 4 very strategic objectives.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is we need to maybe home in a bit more closely on the immediate priorities.
Okay.
Chair, do you want me to just comment?
Please, if you could, Jill, thank you.
Okay. There are 3 pieces of work going on, I think, at the moment. There's the financial sustainability piece of work in terms of obviously the monitoring, the money coming in from the Welsh Government and the pressures, alongside the MTFS normal work, as it were, in terms of setting a 4-year medium-term financial strategy. Alongside that, and I think I referred to this earlier, is the corporate plan work, which is, are those aims and objectives, and I'm talking now below the 3 wellbeing objectives, one of which you've referred to. There are a whole raft of aims and objectives below that. And we're re-looking at all those to see, are they still going to be delivered at all? Are they going to be delivered in part or slower? And are there things that we will deliver that we weren't going to deliver when we first set out the corporate plan? And that piece of work is being done currently, and that's looking at those objectives. And obviously the conversation on risk and what are our priorities that we have to address will drive some of that. So to quote a really daft example, one of the indicators in the corporate plan is the footfall in the town centres. Well, you know, if we report on that, you're going to think we're pretty daft at the moment. So also we're returning leisure sort of facilities. That's not going to happen straight away. There will have to be some revision. We've talked about homelessness. There are new guidelines from the Welsh Government that will change how we deliver the homeless offer. So we're doing that piece of work at the same time. So alongside that is also the risk register. So the 3 pieces of work should dovetail.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jill. So if everybody is happy, can I ask for, whether that you're happy to approve the forward work plan then, please? If you could just type that in the comments box. And Mrs. Williams, if you just say if you're happy to approve.
Sorry, Chair, I have one more small point on the work programme.
Okay.
Just to ask really, why is the annual governance statement review not until November? I just thought that would be fairly easily accommodated in the September meeting alongside the statement of accounts.
Do you want me to pick that up quickly? It's because it covers the financial year, so it covers the 1st of April to the 30th of September, and we'd be reporting on the first 6 months to you. So we wouldn't be able to report in September until we'd seen the end of September.
So is this is 1920 annual governance statement then, isn't it? It says here 2019-20.
Yeah, in the annual governance statement for 1920, there'll be a whole pile of recommendations. There'll be actions that we've set out that have to be delivered in 2021. And that's what would come back to you. It's the half-yearly action plan on the previous year's recommendations.
I understand. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. So we're now on item number 16, urgent items, and I haven't been given any notification of any urgent items. So I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you all for your full participation, for following all the rules and regulations of the Skype meeting, and hope you all stay well and safe, and look forward to seeing you in September, if not before, and any other council meetings. So take good care, and meeting now.